Use the laser, and that's bad.
Do you have the presentation?
Yeah, it's not the desktop.
Oh.
Do you need me to signal your time or anything?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna
do the
go
same thing.
over.
Okay.
Just
So-
make sure to speak in the microphone because in the back when it's not really there.
I was trying really hard, but I think I missed.
I will try. And let me know if I'm not. You can stop me and tell me to get. Is that good?
In the back, everybody can hear.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much for such incredible presentations today. And thanks, Chris, for setting the stage for my work. I'm an artist. I teach in the fine arts program at DAP. And I also have a background in architecture. And I'm excited to share with you some of the stuff in a Strange Tools fashion that I've been working on inside and outside of the studio. So I work at the intersections of architecture, sculpture, and landscape. I utilize withered trees, grasses, earth, and bones to create artworks imbued with a sense of temporality, transience, and subjectivity. My sculptures historicize legacies of vernacular architecture in rural India and speculate a plant-based perspective in a rewilded post-human future. Here's a bit about my process, and I'm thinking a lot. I travel a lot, and a lot of my work comes from growing up in all kinds of strange spaces and having to recontextualize my being and existence over and over and over again, trying to assimilate and failing to do so over and over and over again. So what I think of as my tools, as my process, is this process of disturbing and entangling. And here I'm talking about research, I'm talking about travel, I'm talking about engagement, reading, writing, framing, specificity, mapping, experiencing. And in a process of reconstruction and entanglement, I'm thinking about locating, relocating, visualizing, speculating, imagining, intervening, proposing, offering, and hoping. And I was really excited by today's talk because it made me think about a really different perspective for my work. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the science fictional novel Annihilation, and the film is fine, is good as well, but the book's better. But I'm going to read a short excerpt for it. And for those of you who haven't engaged with it, I highly recommend. One of the most fantastic science fiction books. Inside a staircase plunges a spiraling descent into seemingly infinite darkness. And this line makes me think of Carl Jung and his descent into the home of the unconscious, right? And the curving walls bear a demented message for the expedition members. Written in fungus, a cursive line of living words grows from the smooth, fleshy walls. Where lies the strangling fruit that came from the hand of the sinner, I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead to share with the worms that gather in the darkness. The message goes on, curling downwards, meaning nothing and yet everything. It is the manifesto of the alien occupying Area X, which is where the strange biological phenomena is occurring, condemning the world to death, but also offering rebirth in the cycle of decomposition and replacement. It's the voice of nature itself, merciless and irrepressible, and rising to reclaim its pre-human dominion. So in the book, we go on to understand and question this strange new environment that's being created as this alien species reconsumes the human world and mirrors it to absorb it. And I'm interested in my work in that act of mirroring and otherness. That's one of my most recent pieces. It's made from, it's about 6 feet by 7 feet tall and wide. And it's made from 2 birch trees and a grass bioplastic that I developed. The piece is called Field Birch. Prove it, day said to night, and night succumbed to the heat of day. There were nights when we could not speak on her dark gray light. There were months that the sun shone like blazing fire in the dead of night. Nightless nights we experienced. There were nights when we couldn't dream. There's a few detail shots of the work. You can see a kind of strange, translucent biology, a reckoning that is both vegetal and animal, that is emergent from a dead architecture. The titles in my work are often taken from my experiences traveling and being in different places. And I really think of this specific piece as a veil between life and death, day and night, light and dark. That's another work that was at that recent exhibition, Field Lilac. We are scarecrows hanging on a line. We are bursting tires that fire through a still dry air. We are farmers en route to the fields that direct us through our unpaved trails. We are sizzling overhead cables. We are running milestones. Atop our flyover, we are the oversized truck that has crashed into us, a gang of buffaloes. And we lie stinking and dead, not buffalo, but corpse. We are sacks of fly ash scattered across this highway, interspersed with our broken, flailing bodies. This piece is 9 feet tall and 4 by 4 wide, suspended within this dysfunctional old paper mill building, which is where the site-specific work exhibition took place, and utilizes a grass bioplastic and 2 lilac bushes, turmeric and indigo. I'm thinking here of the impossibility of being from these 2 places, of being in these United States, and the sterility in the landscapes that I encounter here, and being from India, where the wilderness is much closer to home, where the nights and shadows are louder and starker, where in accident the truck crashed the buffaloes and the fly ash mixed in with it, and we live in this mixture of destructive, unsustainable, haunted, beautiful suspensions between life and death. There's some more detailed views of the work. They look, in my opinion, as though they're building themselves. That's very much an illusion. Those are my hands working with this vegetal material to create form, to think through the pod, the growth, the translucence, and how it becomes and be in this world. A third piece, Field Mirror, just 2.5 feet tall and 10 by 10 wide. I saw cattle everywhere in this desert. We were oranges and lemons, the oceans of millions that you touched. We wished you would meet us and greet us and sit by us. We wished you would make us as yourself, ever-changing neon light. And we laughed at you and hated you for it. We opened our markets. We filled them with things you might desire, things that we would come to desire ourselves. We filled our pockets with your currency. Like pimps, we sang and danced. In this work, I'm really sort of thinking about globalization, forces between East and West, what has happened when the economies have opened, and who dictates what is desirable, what is the object of desire. Here's a few closer up shots of the piece. You can see this sort of grotesque, destructive, ubiquitous and special material that is raw and rough. And those are the kinds of aesthetics I'm interested in. And I'm interested in pushing up against the light, bright, pristine gallery space through the aesthetics of the dying and the dead. In the 18th century, ideas of the perfectibility of nature dominated Western thinking. Humankind would make nature better through cultivation, it was believed, and improvement was the mantra. Orderly fields, cleared forests, neat villages turned a savage wilderness into pleasing and productive landscapes. The primeval forests of the New World, by contrast, was a howling wilderness that had to be conquered. Chaos had to be ordered. Evil had to be transformed into good. In 1748, the French thinker Montesquieu had written that humankind had rendered the earth more proper for their abode, with their hands and tools making the earth habitable. Orchards loaded with fruits, tidy vegetable gardens, and meadows grazed by cattle were the ideal of nature at that time. It was a model that would long rule the Western world. Almost a century after Montesquieu's assertion, the French historian Alexis de Tocqueville, during a visit to the United States in 1833, thought that it was the idea of destruction of man's acts in the American wilderness that gave the landscape its touching loveliness. I wasn't interested in biomaterials when I first commenced on this journey. I was invited in 2018 to do a temporary public artwork outdoors at the Franco-Gawa Plaza in downtown Oakland in California. I spent the summer on residency at a gallery in that space and was given access to the City Hall's archives, as well as all of the government employees, for interviews to think through what kind of public artwork would make sense for such a contested site. As you might be able to see through this photograph, the plaza, like many of the public plazas in public space in most of our contemporary cities, is a very panoptic space. 22 cameras are situated along the peripheries of the central green outdoor space. And as I went through the emails and brief documents that were generated by the city when this plaza was being redesigned in the early 90s, I stumbled across this really interesting document that was called The Redesign of City Hall Plaza, Oakland, California, 1984. And this document laid out in very bare bones and in very modernist terms how the design criteria for the design of this public space was to take place. Even from the beginning and from its conception, the language used was, what is the front yard of City Hall? How can this architecture, this imperial architecture of the City Hall building, which you can notice right here, not be consumed or interrupted by the landscape? And of course, you can think about that as a very gendered experience, right? And how do we create an overall design which is formal, understated, elegant, which enhances and is compatible with the neoclassical Beaux-Arts design of the City Hall? My proposal to the city was to pause the mowing of the lawn for one season, and that was it. I was interested in the emergent ecologies that may emerge even from this ubiquitous, mundane, genetically modified, and abject lawn grass. I wondered if birds would leave and drop seeds and things would grow, and if the possibility of history would exist within these abject soils. When ultimately at the end of the season, we had to mow the lawn, I was too attached. I had come to love these lawn clippings, and I wanted to memorialize their death in some specific way. This is what commenced my journey on the development of fields biomaterial. And so, as my practice today, I collect grass clippings from public spaces, from lawn yards, and cook them in my kitchen with few common other kitchen ingredients. And through this process, I plasticize the lawn clippings into a viable bioplastic, which is akin to vegan leather. I'm out of time, but here's a few examples of the kinds of recipes I've developed, the initial tests of how this went from a tiny little pot to a much larger rendition. We did extrusions through 3D printing and robotics with this bioplastic, did a lot of exhibitions showing the process of the research, started to develop actual viable sculptures. And I'm not alone in this work. I work collectively and collaboratively. I really think about this as a social practice that imagines new possibilities of an architecture and a future that is mortal. I do often workshops where I teach how to make this material and invite participants to collectively co-create and think what these future possibilities might be. Here's two examples of artworks that we made together. So we arrived at this concept, which actually doesn't stem from us, since the subsistence concept is an old concept, that what we call life production is actually necessary as a prerequisite for all types of paid labor. At the time we stated, without subsistence labor, there would be no paid labor. But without paid labor, there is still subsistence labor. It is the undying prerequisite for not only every type of life, but also every type of work, that food, housing, and immediate life concerns are taken care of. This work is extremely valuable, but it is never paid for monetarily. That was the point where we saw this connection. And then we also saw that in addition, housework is not the only type of work that is exploited in this way at practically no cost to capitalism. Instead, there is similar work among small farmers who everywhere in the world work for their own subsistence. They sell things in the market too, but they aren't wage laborers. And what's interesting about this is that they're just as absent as women are in the gross national product or the gross domestic product. So to be really clear, this is not just an exercise in aesthetics. We're talking about political structures and economic structures within the worlds that we've created, and what we're each interested in doing to upend those, bring them to light, and also select which ones we can let go. I'm going to go through really fast just to talk about how in the future and currently I'm interested in how these works decay since they are 100% biodegradable outdoors. I experiment with various kinds of seeds that are embedded in the sculptures and what new ecologies and possibilities they may birth when they are displayed in public parks and lawns. I'm interested in the aesthetics of decay and how these pieces will devolve over time and the skeletal structures that they may present us with. And lastly, I want to go back to Annihilation, the science fictional book that I originated this talk from. Plants aren't supposed to behave like this, we think, violently, intelligently. They're supposed to provide oxygen and food and look pretty. Yet nature is not a sympathetic process. It's brutal and horrific and endlessly inventive, like us. Humans, in fact, operate much like the strangleweed on a far more ambitious scale by invading ecosystems, choking off supply lines, transforming organisms to suit our needs. We are bound for a scary awakening. It will likely come from a far less exotic source than an alien that creates out of our ecosystem a new world that works through supreme acts of mirroring without surrendering the foundations of its otherness as it becomes what it encounters. No, it will be rising seas, air pollution, food scarcity, bombs. But Vermeer's scenario is a fitting fantasy and a dire warning to our current direction. imagine a more ironic, well-deserved fate than invasion by a mimic that conquers by our enlightened example? And here's my question to you all. Has light developed as a dominant metaphor for knowledge production within the Western world? How might shade, dark, shadow, smell, touch, metaphors of the unconscious reveal other ways of being and becoming? Thank you.
So you say that's fully biodegradable. What about the time horizon? Does different light have an impact on that, and also in terms of displays? I've noticed they're very different. Some indoor, and then if you put it outdoors, is that a consideration of what you put in? And
Yes, totally. I mean, so much of my process, I mean, I've worked with a few material scientists as I was developing the recipes. But outside of that, so much of this process has been extremely DIY, extremely unmeasured, and learning by doing. I've understood how important humidity and weather conditions are for the way the material dries and the way that it decays. So indoors, they're a lot more stable, and they sort of, maybe the colors change a bit over time. Outdoors, they really start to decompose. So that last image was about 6 months outdoors. That image on this side is this piece after 6 months. So there you can see how, and that's sort of that temporal transformation is what I'm researching.
A lot of your work seems like it involves a lot of physical motion and movement as you're doing, including the making of it, but also these like large unwieldy sculptures that have a lot of motion in themselves. What is like your sensation as you're creating? What kind of emotion are you putting forth when you're doing that?
I really appreciate that question. I think when I first started, again, my background's in architecture and I'm used to being in control. And I think this project for me was a way to rescind some of that control and understand the imperial forces at work within my own consciousness. So in time, it really became a conversation about being with the grass. What is it like to operate rhizomatically? What does it feel like? The material is like goopy and kind of gross. It smells like compost when it's wet. And so there's like ways in which it pushes up against me and it does what it wants to. So I think my entire artistic journey with this material has been about like becoming grass, becoming it, and not just using it, being with it. And so sometimes that involves dancing a lot in the studio, sometimes a lot of music, sometimes a lot of sadness. But it is a very sort of visceral, physical space. All right. Oh, there's one.
First, thank you for your dank insights. But my question or my curiosity was, how much feedback did you get from the public installation of letting nature and that? Do you hear people talking or what?
I mean, it's terrifying for people working with the government to like actually do something like that, where there's all of these public fear. And I think a lot of this project addresses our perceptions of safety, order, and control. And that's what the project was poking at, is what happens when we allow the unaesthetic to be an aesthetic. So there was a lot of conversations, a lot of pushback, a lot of excitement, a lot of dreams about it. There's a lot of people who, even never having seen the project, have really strong opinions about it. But I think overall, the conversation that I was interested in, which is the sort of, I would say, a wider conversation to this interior architecture that we're all talking about today, right? Like, why are things the way they are? Was where the conversation happened, which was really exciting. All right, thank you so much.